time to come back to Earth.
Well, salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Agent 1123, Gemini Brett, here at the Wizard's Tower.
And
Agent Merlin.
Agent Merlin.
Yeah.
And that's right. I figured that I needed an adjective too. If you were Gemini Brett, I needed to be Wizard Rick.
Sounds good. Do you want me to call you Wizard Rick, like when I see you on the
Just
street?
call me Wizard.
Okay.
And I'll call you Gemini.
Right.
Which is all backwards, as you know. We've had this conversation about adjectives and nouns. You don't say, if a room is green, you don't say, I'm going to meet you at green. You say, I'm going to meet you at room.
Right.
And so people who call you Gemini, I know you don't mind, but it's like, no, your name is Brett, and Gemini is the adjective. So I don't mind calling you Gemini Brett, but I'll never call you Gemini. I will call you Brett if I'm limited to one word. That's just me. I mean, I get that, it's your name. You can do whatever you want with it.
I know some kids who are named Scorpio.
Well, that's different, because then that's a noun.
Right. Well, maybe I'm trying to nounify Gemini. I mean, it seems like a pretty Saturnian, maybe even Uranian conversation, Rick.
Yeah.
Trying to make changes over here, and you're just harshing on my trip, man.
Look, Gemini, it's okay with me.
Ah, the release. Hi, this is Rick Levine.
And this is Gemini.
And we're really excited.
Is your last name Brett? Is that how that works?
It is in this space. I'm keeping it low-key. I've been talking about the president too much,
No. Speaking of Uranus and Saturn, we will get there.
Interesting, indeed. So we're going to speak a bit about Saturn and Uranus and their dance over time and what they're doing now. Last time I was here at the Wizard's Tower, Rick and I spoke about Saturn and Neptune. And we were going to do 3 of them, and then Neptune said no, because we both travel so much.
And I think what Saturn and Neptune really say is that what you think is real, Saturn, may not be Neptune.
Right. And so today we speak about what Saturn and Uranus say. And, it's a great time for us in their cycle. We're in a trine between Saturn and the sign of Sagittarius and Uranus and another fire sign, Aries, and coming this August, this great total solar eclipse event, along with Mars and the north node of the moon. We'll see some grand fire trines with Saturn and Uranus. So pretty exciting time to speak about the fire, to speak about these planets, and to speak about the trine, which we don't do enough. I speak so often about the lunation cycle, and really encourage students to just feel and experience the lunation cycle.
Which focuses obviously on the fortnight experience of the new moon to the full moon to the new moon to the full moon. We forget in our modern calendaring system where we always know what day it is and what time it is, that a fortnight was an absolute, vital piece of timekeeping. And it was the time between the new moon and the full moon and the full moon and the new moon. And in fact, our concept of a week, which we think is like a universal concept, it's not, is really just a half of a fortnight, because the way we give structure to things is we take a cycle, we divide it in half, and we divide it in half again. And that's the origin of the month, the moon, and the fortnight, and the week. Because a fortnight is half of a month, and a week is half of a fortnight. Anyhow, I didn't mean to sidetrack you. It was just into what you were saying.
I think it's the same track.
It's the same track.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a huge difference between new moon and full moon, especially if we don't have city lights, right? Traveling at night under the light of the full moon is an easy thing to do, but if you really want to connect to the brilliance of the stars, it's about the new moon time for sure. So we speak often about conjunctions, squares, oppositions, the so-called hard aspects in astrology. Why?
Because that's where the action is. When you have cycles and you divide them by in half or in quarter, that's where the stress or the tension is. And in life, we notice events which are precipitated by stress or tension. We don't notice the day when nothing happens. If you look back in your life and someone says, so 1996 or the 80s, the things that tell me something you remember about the 80s. Oh, I remember that summer I went to Europe. Oh, I remember getting married. We remember the events. We don't remember the week when we just were chill and were hanging out. And although it's not about good or bad, trines and sextiles compared to conjunctions, squares, and oppositions, are about easy and hard.
Yeah.
And of course, we make the mistake of thinking that easy is good, so we put a value judgment of trines and sextiles as good, and we say that squares and oppositions, in fact, the traditional jargon in astrology, is an adverse aspect or an affliction. I mean, and squares are not afflictions. What they are is the grist for the mill that makes the wheat that then gives us the bread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we got to hear some beautiful flute from Agent Merlin at the beginning here, call us all to order. And music,
it's Uranus involved. We're calling us all to chaos.
And music, we have notes and rests and tension and. Should I finish that? Release. Yeah.
There you go.
And so we feel this too in these squares and trines. The first quarter moon, this sprouting of the seeds, and before we get to the flowers at full moon time, there's a bit of a release as we engage with this trine. We don't see that half moon that has such a perfect slice and just kind of looks weird. And the moon and the sun, from Earth's point of view, moving in perpendicular directions at that time. But the trine comes, and there's this angularity that we come into just the difference between a triangle and a square, and that's an amazing, endless contemplation in itself. So
well, and it is, and we can go back to concepts of sacred geometry. We can certainly go to concepts of Buckminster Fuller, who talks about the triangle being the most singular, stable form in the universe. Mm-hmm. We think of things, we live in houses that are squared, and yet any architect will tell you that the square is inherently unstable. You need to stress it. You need to put corners on things in order to make that square stay straight. Now, one of the things I love doing with a client who has a lot of squares in their chart is I have, with little rubber connectors, you could do this with toothpicks or straws even, but I'm taking 4 pieces that are connected or glued at the corner and handing them to the client and saying, hold this steady, and whether you hold 2 corners adjacent, a square, or 2 corners opposite, I can reach the other 2 corners and get it wobbling because you can't hold the structure. But with a triangle, it's inherently stable. And the whole idea of triangulation for stability in nature does it in trees and geometry of how things, and this is basically Buckminster Fuller's great breakthrough concept of tensegrity, where compression and tension were balanced perfectly, and the ensuing invention of the geodesic dome. Mm-hmm. So this idea of a trine, it's neither good nor bad, it's stable. Mm-hmm. And the problem with stability is that terrible habits can be stabilized, and I'm sure that you've had this situation of having clients with a grand trine, which historically, traditionally in astrology is considered to be good news, and yet they have some aspect of their life that they just can't change. Mm. It works, but it's boring and it doesn't get them anywhere. And it's the client who walks into your office looking like they walked off the cover of GQ Quarterly, with deck shoes and and an open collared shirt, and just looking like everything was cool, the silver spoon birth kind of. And you begin to talk to this person who looks like like everything is really fine, and you begin to touch a deep malaise that the person can't get any traction in their life and do anything of any importance, and it's driving them nuts because everything seems easy, and yet you compare that to a chart with someone with some really ugly squares or oppositions, and these are the people who are the Nobel Prize winners and the people who make incredible breakthrough discoveries, the political leaders, the spiritual gurus, because they've had that, and this is a Ram Dass term, they've had that grist for their mill, that they've actually used the hard work that's involved in doing something to creatively resolve the stress or the tension of a square or a conjunction or an opposition.
Yeah, and the truth is we all have a bit of it all, don't we? Right, and so these sextiles and trines not often spoken enough about because they're not that hard. They don't bring chaos into the life by transit, right? So usually with clients we'll speak about, oh, okay, here's Pluto's coming to conjoin your Mars, here's the Uranus square to Venus, whatever it may be, and really, you know, I've started doing this more and more often. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, Pluto's opposite your Mars right now, but you know, your Mars when you were born was sextile the Moon. And this means that Pluto is also trining the Moon. So call on that activation, right? Get support from that activation to help you through this other transit that's here to awaken you.
You know, another piece of this is the idea that the time to replace the sails on your boat is not during a storm.
Right.
Which would be a square or an opposition or a conjunction. The time to refit the sails or to repaint the deck of your sailing ship is in calm seas. And the problem with the sextiles and trines is that sometimes they give us the wrong message. They give us the message of everything's cool, everything's calm, enjoy it, kick back and relax. When those are the times that we should be doing the work that would make the squares or the conjunctions a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Because we'd be prepared for them, we would know the routine, we wouldn't be learning. You know, it's like you can't learn what liberation is at the moment of death. You have to practice, and then when you die, it's a Buddhist concept. You know where you're going and you know what to do, so to speak.
Right. So activating these trines might help us engage, for example, with prayer before things go to a place where we feel like we have to.
Exactly. And now bringing it to the current year, where there are other things that astrologers have been talking about more, even the Jupiter square Pluto, because we're into the squares, you know. But as we both know, that the primary, strongest, lowest frequency, deepest note of the year that began back around Christmas of 2016 and doesn't reach its third and final time until November. It's almost a year long that we're under the influence, we're driving under the influence of Saturn trine Uranus. And that's a very, very powerful, particular, valuable time, but it's also a time when we can get lazy because it's a trine.
Yeah. And we should say that this is the waning trine of the cycle. Saturn and Uranus, which were conjoined in 1988, have since reached opposition. Think of that like a full moon, but in this case, Uranus, which moves slower, would be like the sun. Saturn, which moves faster, would be like the moon. Different than a lunation cycle because they're moving further. It's a much longer trip, but
the geometry is still the same. There's still a conjunction. There's still a new moon and a full moon phase.
Yeah.
And at a new moon phase in the 1988-89 period, that's when the seed was planted. At the full moon phase, that's where the culmination was, which I think pretty closely corresponded with the financial meltdown, or at least bits of that.
Right, and Pluto's ingress. And Pluto's ingress Capricorn was around that time, so a lot going on. That little thing. So anyway, we've reached fullness in a way in the cycle. We're in the second half. We're in the waning half. Saturn's heading towards Uranus for their next conjunction. And I mean, before we really speak about the cycle at large and the trine, let's talk about the players. So, who is Saturn and who is Uranus?
All right. Well, here, there's a really an interesting story that I like to tell. That's different from the story you get reading the books. I mean, we all can read the books and go, yeah, sure, Saturn's authority, Saturn is karma, Saturn is the. I mean, we get that about Saturn. Saturn is the tester. It's the it's the grim reaper. Oh, we know all that stuff. We know that Uranus is erratic and eccentric and other than normal and rebellious. Fine. But here's what we don't get, and this goes back to a little bit of history. For roughly, well, in astrology for a few thousand years, but for all of time that man has been, and woman, has been looking at the skies, Saturn was the limit. Saturn was the outward bound, used in the correct word, meaning of outward binding. It was because you couldn't go out beyond Saturn and still have animate, still have movement, still have life. Because out past Saturn was the sphere of fixed stars. They didn't move. And so we had this, regardless of what our view of the local system was, we knew that Saturn was the limit. Until one day in the 18th century, Uranus was discovered, and all of a sudden the real estate overnight like tripled. And it basically was a shock, because the limit of Saturn, which was the outward bound, you couldn't get any further out than Saturn, all of a sudden, wait, there's another whole universe. We can't see it with our naked eyes, which is a metaphor for we can't perceive it with our five senses, but it's there. You can't argue with its existence, and it changes, and it changed everything.
Yeah, and it took a while even to get a name. Uranus is so freaky and so revolutionary. It's like, wait a second, how do we name a planet? I mean,
let's
Herschel
just call
tried
it
to
George.
name it George.
Let's just call it George.
Because King George was paying the bills, and you can imagine the American astronomers in 1781 didn't take to that too well.
That's right.
Let's
name this planet for the asshole that's that we just went to war against.
Yeah, so that didn't work out so well here. But yeah, so it took a while for Uranus to claim a name, and I wonder, I don't know how long it took for then modern astrologers to kind of reposition Aquarius, which was traditionally known as one of Saturn's domiciles, and kind of hand that over to Uranus, and what kind of battle takes place between these planets who mythologically were son and father, Saturn and Uranus.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, two interesting things about Uranus: A, its name, and B, its connection with a sign. And of course, there's a whole discussion about classical astrology and reasons why there can't be connections between outer planets and signs that I am a modern astrologer in that sense. I get, the logic of traditional astrology, but I am one who does connect in my mind Uranus with Aquarius, although I certainly see the Saturnian side of Aquarius also. But there is a case to be made. Rob Hand makes this case that of all the outer planet connections with signs, Uranus is the most tenuous and the least defensible. I don't agree with that, but I respect the people who say that. That's one thing. The other thing is that then another case can be made, and this is made very strongly by Rick Tarnas, who makes the case that Uranus was mislabeled, misnamed, and that a much more mythologically correct name for Uranus would be Prometheus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Uranus is really the Promethean planet. It's the planet of invention and future and technology, and it stole the fire from the gods.
And also trauma and liberation, which is a Promethean theme too. But Uranus was the heavens, and Uranus and that Aquarian energy does allow us to expand our consciousness beyond the visible, as the discovery of Uranus was a thing. So in that side, I can see that correlation. But yeah, it feels certainly when Uranus comes knocking by transit, it certainly feels like a Promethean time in our lives.
And I think that Uranus, when it comes knocking, I think Saturn comes knocking by transit. When Uranus comes, it comes by lightning.
Yeah.
You see, because Uranus, astrologically, Uranus, even though we'd like to think Thor, Jupiter, thunder, god of thunder, lightning, and I'm not taking anything away from that metaphor, but the fact of the matter is that Uranus's function is that of lightning. And here's how it works very simplistically, that in nature, and I know you are also. I sound like Trump. I'm starting a sentence and I'm going in 4 different directions. No, I don't.
Like a Gemini.
A Gemini rising.
Oops.
Just call me Gemini rising.
You and me both, buddy.
I always or often will look to nature for the real meanings and the archetypal understandings of the planets and the signs. You can read all the books you want about the sign of Leo, where the coming eclipse will be. And that's great, and it's useful. But I learned more about 20 years ago watching a 1-hour National Geographic special about lions, about Leo, than I ever got out of any textbook. and I don't want to go just down that track. But the point is that sometimes we modern astrologers forget that this shit is natural.
Well, I think that's actually a really cool place on this road because, Uranus can really be these antennas into the cosmos and can be our higher meditations and liberation of consciousness in that way. But just as Rick's saying, really, like, no contemplation that we have, if it's not rooted in nature, it's not real. And Saturn is a very nature planet, especially on that Capricorn sign, the bones. But it used to be the skin, too. I mean, medically we still say that, but skin is porous, it separates us. You need to move
this way a little bit more.
All right.
Skin, teeth, and bones.
Right.
That which gives structure.
Yeah, and so I like, when we think of Saturn as Capricorn Aquarius, like, so he's the wall and the gate, and skin is also porous, and Uranus in so many ways kind of claimed that liberation side of that conversation in modern astrology, and it's not to say it's not worthy, but Saturn rooting us back into nature, I think is a really beautiful way where what you just said to say.
So I want to come back to the lightning thing in a minute.
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten. But you brought up something that I think is another very significant part of Saturn, because we moderners sometimes think of Saturn as a wall. It's static. It's dead. It's and yet the symbol of Saturn is the cross of the material world with an animated lunar cycle hanging from it. It's the S part of the backwards, ST. But the work of Bruce Lipton, the guy who wrote The Biology of Belief and a number of other books, one of Bruce's most brilliant breakthrough concepts is the idea that, and he came to this while he was a research fellow at Stanford University doing blood chemistry research in HIV immunology. The concept is that it's a mistake of modern science to believe that the key, the consciousness, is in the nucleus of the cell or in the DNA, RNA. That consciousness does not arise in the cell. Does not arise in the nucleus of the cell. Consciousness arises in the cell wall. That's Saturn. And what happens in the cell wall is that every time something comes up and bumps up against it, it creates a hum, and that hits sensors on the outside of the cell wall, that things on the inside of the cell wall make a decision as to whether an ion gate should open or not. This is Saturn. It's the boundary between that which is not self and that which is self. And this is where consciousness arises. Even the Greeks called Saturn the gatekeeper. The soul, as it incarnates, comes through the light. Lucifer falls through Saturn, then Jupiter, Mars, down to Earth. But Saturn is the outward circumference, is the outward gate. But that gate is not static, it's dynamic, and that is the origin of consciousness. Now, back to Uranus for a second. So, in nature, when a storm is coming, we have a warm, wet air mass. Warm, wet makes negative ions. When you go to the beach and the waves are washing up, the waves, water moving on water, creates negative ions which make us feel relaxed and good. At a waterfall, at a murmuring, murmuring and babbling, a murmuring brook. There's something that's very settling about being there. Even taking a shower. This is all negative ionization. That feels good. Negative ions, it's just a particle charge. However, when you have cold air moving against cold air, cold, dry air, it creates positive ions which agitate us. It's the concept, the saying, an ill wind blows no good. These are the cold winds that are dry. The Fen, the Sabra, the Fen in Switzerland, the Sabra and the Chinooks in the north part of the United States, the Santa Anas. These dry winds make mosquitoes go crazy, and because they're often before a storm, but they're agitating. Now here's the deal. They tell us I don't know who they is, but they tell us, the National Research Institute, they tell us that when there's stress or tension, communication is good because it works it out. And usually it is. That's a good metaphor, a good rule to live life by. But there are things that the more you talk about, the worse it gets.
And there are things where taking some pause before you engage in the conversation is wise.
But there are things that not engaging in the conversation is wise, because because it doesn't matter. The more you talk about it, the greater the tension is. Now here we come back to the storm. You have the warm, wet air mass, negative ions, the positive, cold, dry air, positive ionized, cold, dry air, and they come together and they start rubbing up against each other, trying to work it out. They communicate. But anyone who's lived in like the central United States in the north in the winter knows that in the winter when you shuffle your feet and you touch something, you get a shock. And you get that shock because the more these two things rub up against each other, they don't work it out. They increase the tension. They increase the tension until the tension is irresolvable. And then Uranus strikes, and all of a sudden the tension isn't there. That's Uranus's single job. Uranus has a job description. There's lots of corollaries, but its most important job is Uranus's job is the instantaneous, keyword, the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. That's all Uranus does. And the greater the irresolvable opposites are, the greater the tension is, the more powerful the lightning strike is. If we have no tension in our life, we can have Uranus come across our sun or our moon and nothing will happen. Because there's no tension to explode. Yes. It's the deeper, the darker, the more hidden, the more buried, the more unconscious, the more in denial, the more avoidance, the greater it's the great awakener. If we're awake, we don't notice. There's a story of Ram Dass going to see Neem Karoli Baba back in the 60s, and Ram Dass had a pocket full of LSD. And Neem Karoli Baba meets him and says, Ram Dass, welcome. Those pills you have in your pocket, he didn't say anything about it, he just, those pills you have in your pocket, give them to me. And Ram Dass, like sheepishly, then handed him like 20 hits of good LSD, and Neem Karoli Baba takes them all at once. And nothing happened.
Already liberated.
So if we're already awake, the Great Awakener just is like, hi guys, I know you.
Let me add another job description that I've come to find in Uranus. To me, the image is the Tower card, especially the card from the Rider-Waite deck, that great image.
Totally.
Right? And here's two falling, and I would say one diving from the tower and the other falling, crown still on the head, but one has had the crown blasted off by a lightning bolt from the heavens, and here's this ivory tower, we could say, that's crumbling, that's going to fall apart. Both will have a chance to build their own righteous tower from the false tower that has just crumbled, thanks to the lightning bolt from the heavens. And we see phoenix birds and the 3 windows, and 3 being a number, empress, nurturing, etc., etc. But there's this thing where if we get too structured, if we get too Saturn, we could even say, we need that lightning bolt to blast it apart and to fall and to have the liberation. But I see in so many ways that Uranus, who actually is very infrequently, and I've been initiated now, visible with the naked eye, and in a way, in that essence, it's like Uranus brings us the opportunity to see something invisible, and in a way is carrying a message from Neptune, Pluto, and we can never receive that nebulous weirdness of Neptune or that raw nature of Pluto if we're so structured. And that Uranus comes in and smashes that thing to bits so that the water can spill in. But then, because that's job 1, job 2 would be going back to the other crew and saying, look, here's the trip. These people are weird. They have hands, they have language, they have adjectives and nouns, and if you want to speak to them, you're going to have to learn to come into their world, into nature. And so that's that side where we kind of speak of Uranus as like the next level of Mercury, right?
Oh, I agree with that, and I think even mathematically that like a secondary progression, Mercury is 88 days and Uranus is 84, but it's within the mathematical resonance of being a day for a year, so to speak. So there is an octave, a harmonic octave connection mathematically between Mercury and Uranus too. And yes, they are. I mean, Mercury is the thought, and Uranus is the distribution system. I mean, the nervous system.
Yes.
And when you were talking, this is the other thing that just so perfectly dovetailed, because the tower. You see, when Saturn becomes too much of a static wall, it becomes dead. That's Father Time. That is the Grim Reaper. So when Saturn becomes too structured, the lightning strikes and takes down the structure to create the ability to create new structure. But what we forget is that the lightning is electrical, as is life. That Uranus becomes an animating factor. Nikola Tesla knew this. He understood the relationship that lightning was necessary for crops to grow. That there was an animating factor of the electrical charge that was distributed through Earth, almost like a capacitor. And so this idea of the tower, it's not just the lightning striking to take down the structure, it's the lightning in a healthy way hitting the structure to continually reanimate it.
Yeah, I'm looking at these beautiful trees outside, and I'm having visions of that mycelial network underground that lets them speak to one another over long distances.
Beautiful.
Right, and that nervous system.
Nervous system.
That's such an image of really Mercury and Uranus as well. It's like this higher nervous system to our other bits that aren't only contained in the body.
You see, and we forget. No, it's not too far. We forget. We moderners don't have a clue as to what it was like. And prior to the late 18th century, there was no understanding of lightning being electrical. That was Benjamin Franklin's flying a kite, that as a kid we think, oh, how funny and how cool and whatever. But the fact was that this was a way of understanding that at that same time you had Galvani, who was basically taking dead frogs and electrically stimulating the nervous system on a dead frog's leg and watching it twitch, going, wow, there's something about the animating factor that's electrical. And now we have Franklin saying, oh my God, on the macrocosmic level, we have the same electrical force, this electrical dynamic. And it's Uranus on both ends. Uranus is the nervous system. So, back to the Uranus trine. I think we've beat up, and we could go on. Sorry, back to the Uranus trine.
One thing I just have to put in, it's not like Saturn doesn't have outlets in his house either, because everything is electrical. And maybe Uranus is here to remind us of that, too. So they began in Capricorn.
The conjunction back in the late 80s.
Yeah, 3 conjunctions, right?
Yeah.
And I can just remind you were going to say something to us about how sometimes these planets, it's not like a new moon where moon and sun are always moving in the same direction. Planets can retrograde, right?
Well, that's right. You only get one full moon. You can't get 3 full moons like as part of the same pattern.
Right.
But because of the retrograde motion, we can have 3 or 5 or even 7 occurrences of the same aspect.
Or 1. Right.
Or 1.
So in 88, 89, we had 3 of these things. The time before Saturn conjoined Uranus, there was only 1 conjunction. That was in 1942.
Yes.
And I just don't want to sleep on you sharing what you told me before we started, because I thought it was really significant about these differences between transits in our own personal charts or these outer planet alignments where you can have 1 or you can have many.
Yeah, and when we were talking about this before we went live, what I was thinking of is this. We've all had clients who have come to us who were coming up to, we just had a visitation from my neighbor at the Crow.
Kronos.
Kronos. I guess Crow Noose. Have had clients who are astrologers who have said, I'm coming into a Saturn return, but oh my God, I'm getting 3 of them. This is terrible because it's going to spread out over 8 months. And God, why couldn't I have been lucky? Some people just get 1 and they're done with it. And it's been my observation, and other astrologers that I've shared this with, I mean, you agreed also, and that is that when you get a transit that only hits once, whether it's a transit to your chart or whether it's a mundane transit that's occurring out there, that it's more difficult than when you get it 3 times, 5 times, or the recent Uranus-Pluto square that we had it 7 times, 5 times.
7 times.
7 times.
Uranus, Pluto, yeah.
7 times. And because that was spread out over 3 years, we had more ability to work with it and integrate it. Not that we did a good job, but theoretically, you have more time to move with it and to learn the steps of the dance. Whereas if it occurs only once, it could be life-altering in an afternoon.
You know what's coming in when you say that, though, is that also maybe that one hit, it's kind of more like these squares or oppositions, where the many times where, you know, you're saying, well, we didn't really necessarily connect to this thing because maybe it's a little more nebulous, you know.
Oh, I think we live under the illusion that we have more time to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
When you get a transit that's a one-hit, it's not like a one-hitter. When you get a transit that's like a one-hit transit, it's like there's no way that you can go into denial about it. It's going to whack you over the head. There was an old saying early on in the internet that I don't know if it's still around, but it was like being hit over the head with a clue by 4.
Nice.
That's what a one-hit transit is. It's like, wow, bam. Can't deny that one.
Yeah, and so in these sextile trines, I mean, Saturn also in a you know, very strong and merging sextile with Jupiter right now, and they have generosity according to the old traditions and whatever, because Jupiter is in Saturn's sign of exaltation, Libra, and Saturn's in Jupiter's domicile of Sagittarius. So that sextile, I don't think it's necessarily playing out too easily in my book, and it has not perfected yet. That's coming our way soon, but that's a key, significant aspect that's happening right now. And then the Saturn-Uranus trine. And they might not be saying, wake up, liberate, do something, change, right? It's a little bit more of a slow burn or something we could miss altogether. Do you feel that's possible?
Well, yes and no. As you know, I do this monthly YouTube thing that I record live the last Wednesday of every month. And the one that I did at the end of April for May, because the second of the 3 Saturn-Uranus trines was on May 18th. And as I was looking ahead from the end of April toward May and toward seeing this trine, the first one happened around Christmas time of last year, of 2016, and seeing Saturn coming into trining Uranus exactly, I said, you know, what we have right now in the United States of America is we have a person standing in the place where a president would normally stand, and this person is a Uranian, and you can take away whatever my value judgments might be, and I do have them, but you can take them away. Trump is a Uranian. I mean, he was born during an eclipse. There's an argument for eclipses being Uranian energies because of the polarizing factor and the sudden awakening, shifting, time distorting. That's another discussion. But he was born during an eclipse with his sun conjunct Uranus. He is a Uranian.
Yeah.
And he was born with that Uranus very closely trine to Jupiter and Chiron, so he gets away with it. I mean, there's another whole story there. I don't want to go down that track. I just want to make the point that Trump is a Uranian who's basically, on some levels, again, this depends on your political stance, but from my perspective, he's a Uranian that's totally out of control. Saturn comes in and trines it, and what I said in my April talk, we can look at things happening around the second of the 3 trines as being Saturn coming in, not to stop it, but to bring in some limits, to bring in some sense of order, which is what Saturn does. Normally, it's Uranus disrupting Saturn, but there's always a synergy between 2 planets working back and forth that is not just the slower moving planet acting on the faster one. It works both ways. And so with this transit, I said, we could look to possibly seeing some events around perhaps gaining some control around this runaway train. And it was within 24 hours of that exact trine that Mueller was appointed as the general, the chief investigator, general counsel, independent counsel, which, regardless of what the other events that are going on, there's this Saturn Uranus thing that is holding with us. And it's my contention that we will see the fruition of this coming toward November, the actual, November 11th. We will see the actual, coming of the tying up of the knots of this particular phase. And that doesn't mean that some things won't occur prior to then. I know many of us astrologers are looking at the eclipse for, things loosening. And it doesn't mean that everything will be resolved. This is not like a one-time shot of, everything is going to be resolved, regardless of what political leanings you have. But you can see how Saturn and Uranus work together by just understanding that on the day of that, or within 24 hours of that exact trine, you had a Saturnian influence come in around that Uranian being.
Yeah, I'll add a couple other pieces that tie this also to the coming eclipse. I mean, not only is this Leo eclipse going to be in Grand Fire trine with Aries, Uranus, and Sagittarius, Saturn. Mars is in Leo, very close to the eclipse, North Node eclipse. But my research of eclipses recently has brought me to the new moons at the bendings, right? So the furthest thing from an eclipse possible.
Well, that was going on then too.
Right, in May 25th was the
exactly.
Gemini new moon, which was the new moon at the southern bending. And that's the bendings, it's the new moon exactly between the two eclipses of a year. Typically we have two solar eclipses a year, and this year was February 26, 2017, August 21st, 2017. Also, like just before this first Saturn-Uranus trine, so it's definitely heating up, we had the North Node bending new moon in November, right around the election time, November 2016. And that'll be the same thing this year, right around this last of the three exact trine alignments between Saturn and Uranus, another moon at the bendings. And so there's many things that are tying us in, but certainly this Grand Fire trine with this eclipse, and the first eclipse that's come to the continental United States since 1979, the first one from sea to shining sea since 1918. I don't know about you, but the transits to the president's chart, I mean, I kind of never seen anything like it. You've been practicing in this craft for a lot longer than I have, but there are so many significant planetary alignments, and this guy was born during an eclipse, and I don't want to go there because I've been speaking about this at length in so many other places.
No, and neither do I, and nor do I want to mention the fact that I have a natal Saturn at 29 Leo, conjunct Regulus, conjunct Trump's Mars, and his ascendant, whatever.
I was going to say that, buddy. My grandfather's got Saturn just there as well, and he just reached ultimate liberation on Independence Day. So that's one way that this eclipse is showing up for me and my own personal family and whatnot. So without getting too lost into eclipse land, because there's still plenty of time to do that, do we see that in a way the celestial symphony has been arranged so that we would have this Grand Fire trine, and that somehow Saturn and Uranus are supporting this eclipse so it doesn't have to go entirely haywire?
And that was my comment, although I don't know I made it clearly right now, about the Saturn-Uranus trine in general, that normally that Uranus's lightning can create chaos. Going back to Bruce Lipton stuff, it's like forms of life grow to a point of ultimate complexity and they can't grow anymore, and then something has to happen that's cataclysmic and it reorganizes on another level. And in some ways we've reached that point culturally, socially, specially, as a species. We've reached that point. We have taken the complexity to a point where there's got to be some sort of major reshuffling. And and I see Trump, and I don't want to just single him out, but I see the kind of fear-mongering, divisive, the hateful, the anti-feminist, multiracial, all of this, the condensation of greed and power at the top, all of this is basically a fear reaction of dinosaurs who are going extinct. Now, it may not happen right away, I mean, when I was in my late teens, I thought it was going to be within a few years. I was the late 60s. I mean, it was rock and roll. I thought it was all going down. You know, it's, 40 years later, and it's still all going down, but it's going down in slow-mo. And that could be another week, another month, another decade, another century. I don't know. But the thing is that we are hung in a bit of a balance. And what we're seeing here in a kind of cosmic instant replay, the Uranus-Saturn conjunction of 1942 was kind of like a culmination of what was building for a few years prior to that in what we saw as pre-war Nazi Germany, but we saw the rise of totalitarianism, not just in Hitler, but in Italy and Mussolini and Tito and Stalin, and there was this fear of change, which is the Uranus coming in and changing everything. Saturn going, no, we ain't going. We got to hold on to what we have. We got to make this great again, as if it was ever great. We have to basically, build the wall, which is such a Saturnian metaphor.
I mean, Cancer, Saturn in the 11th house.
but just the idea of building walls rather than doors, and this idea that every time we have the Saturn-Uranus thing, we go through this little dance of having to fight the fear of change. Now, does that mean that this trine will mean that everything will come out okay and that we'll end up changing in a positive way? Maybe. And maybe not. Because, as we know, astrology is not mechanistic. Neither is the universe. There is that magic unknown that I've referred to this as, for years, it's the Uranian zap factor. So here's a question for you. One of the key words for Uranus is unexpected. So how do you predict something that's unexpected? Because that's what Uranus is. Uranus always it's lightning. I can know that there's tension and that we're going to be in for a big storm and there's going to be thunder and lightning. We don't get much of that up here in the Pacific Northwest because we don't have the extreme hot cold that's required as you do in the Midwest, where you get the dry air and the wet air mixing. Here it's just a slower, more gradual mix. But you can say, yes, the lightning, or in the midst of a storm. If you're a photographer, I've tried to photograph lightning. It's like,
video and then take a still.
Well, yes, but the point is that it's Uranus is like the quantum, planet, in as much as it is unpredictable.
Yes.
And yet it's going to happen. That's not unpredictable. You just predicted it's going to happen. It's just you can't know when and where. You
predicted something unpredictable will happen. But yeah, no, I mean, run video and then take a still.
No, I got that part.
And like literally as a conscious approach to these transits as well, right? Because if you're waiting for that day, or just trying to have the exact right magical ceremony to prevent or call in A or B, right? It is so unpredictable, and that's part of the beauty of the thing, right? So one of my great gurus is Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas, only because there's a line where they're like, is it the cat a bat? Or he's like, that's the point of the thing, not to know.
Well, and what you just said, I mean, I would be remiss, and my people who know me and my work, my fans would say, I can't believe he didn't say, and so I'm going to say it.
Yes.
And that is taking video and then taking a still from it is basically a great metaphor for the particle wave duality. Because time moves as a wave, and yet we particularize the strikes of lightning. Those are the events that precipitate out of the quantum indeterminacy.
Speaking of quantum indeterminacy and the unknown, it's really hard to put a finger on this Capricorn conjunction of Saturn and Uranus. We have dates, but the issue is that Neptune was on the scene as well. So we had Saturn, Neptune, we had Uranus, Neptune, and it's just so much going down. And then Capricorn's also this kind of like this venue for a lot of planetary happenings coming up in a few years.
But that particular time, the late 80s, early 90s, because although we had Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Neptune, although we had Saturn, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, Saturn, Neptune is what I was trying to say. We also had Uranus, Neptune. And that's a bit of a heavier weight, slower moving. But, we look back at that period of time, and there's not been a time in modern history, maybe save post-World War I, when so many lines on the maps were redrawn. We had a huge, and lines on maps are Saturn. Sudden is Uranus. We had a period of a couple of years where all of a sudden a map that you had from 1985 in 1993 was worthless. It didn't even have the right names of the countries or the boundaries. This is Saturn-Uranus at work.
Yeah, and so what else was going on at the time? I was just a punk kid, you know? But I'm born in 75. I'd love to actually talk to you about Saturn and Uranus in my own nativity, too, as we approach close, or maybe after. But, yeah, what else was alive, like, for you at that time, or in our astrological community?
Well, the astrological community was abuzz, and one of the things it was abuzz with... Now, remember, Saturn and Uranus share another thing. They both, in their own way, have to do with old age or older age. In a very different, they both have to do with history. They both have to do with tradition, except Saturn looks back at tradition and says, this is the way it is. Uranus says, yes, but let's look back further, and that was weird. There's that, and what we saw during the Saturn-Uranus phase was Project Hindsight.
Yeah.
We saw astrology, modern astrology, reconnecting with its Saturnian roots, which basically Uranian blew people's minds and awakened them to the fact that history was not what we thought it was. And that's one of the pieces.
I want to not leave something you just said, that Saturn and Uranus both have to do with old age, but in different ways. Could you say something more about that?
Maybe, maybe not. I think that, I mean, see, Saturn is the crone, Saturn is the old wise woman or man. Saturn is wisdom. Saturn is the result of, Saturn is not, we say chronos, but it's chronic, It's those things that have to do with age, with doing, you do the same thing again and again and again, it becomes chronic. Uranus has two things. Number one, Uranus says, I don't care how chronic it is, in a moment, everything can change. That's what Uranus's answer to Chronos is.
Yeah.
That the structure and the restraints, constraints, and authority of Saturn is just another fucking illusion. It's a good illusion, but it's just another illusion. Now, but then, in ancient times, if you were 30 years old, you were old and wise. Now you're just not a kid anymore. You don't get really old until you've had a Uranus return. And there's something about the difference in the flavor of old Saturn and old Uranus is very different, because old Saturn is very structured and authoritative, and that wisdom of the ages. Uranus, the age of Uranus, or the age associated, I mean the human chronological age associated with Uranus, is I'm fucking free. I'm a second child. I have what's his name's disease.
Alzheimer's.
Oh yeah, I forget. No, it's that is also Uranian. It's the second childhood. It's the I'm old enough that I can be as weird and bizarre and as childlike, because I don't. But it's still old age. But it's old age on steroids. It's old age squared. It's taken to another level. But they are both about that which is either old and integrated as tradition, or old which has to be reintegrated as shock.
Yes. Let's just be weird real quick. First person to ask a question in the comments right now gets to ask Rick Levine anything. Shoot.
The answer is yes.
Oh, that's even weirder. All right, people aren't fast enough anyway, so you already got your answer. I look forward to seeing what the question is.
Yeah, me too.
So I'll ask a question. So let's think about this grand fire trine, and what would... Well, we get one?
Wait,
what's the
topic here? The topic,
yes.
The topic is yes.
LOL. Perfect. All right, it has been answered. So Saturn in Sagittarius.
Although we have someone who feels like he was just this.
I don't think so.
The topic here is astrology, and Uranus and Saturn in particular.
But yeah, the question was any question. So here's any question. Saturn in Sagittarius, Uranus in Aries. Okay.
And then stuff
So,
in
well,
Leo.
so who are those guys? And then how are they, supporting this eclipse in this structure of a grand fire trine?
Yeah, it's Uranus. I think it's important to understand that it's not just Saturn in Sagittarius and Uranus in Aries. It's Uranus at the very, very end of 6 years, 7 years in Aries. There's no mystery about what Uranus in Aries is now. We've experienced it. We may not have a perspective enough on it to know what the fuck happened, but we experienced it.
I call it occupy yourself.
I like that.
But yeah, is there another one-liner that you've got for the Uranus and Aries calling?
Well, when Uranus first moved into Aries, I did a number of lectures on it, and I still stand. It's yell fire. Mm. It's fire in the sky. It's Michael Franti, fire in the sky. Mm-hmm. Yell fire. It's that idea that when Uranus goes into Aries, the shock, the surprise, the awe is spontaneous, so spontaneous we don't even know what is happening. We forget, I don't say we forget, many people don't realize that on the ingress, on the day of the ingress...
Second ingress, right? March 11th, 2011.
Yes. Well, the day of the permanent ingress.
Yeah. Because the waters of Pisces to the fire of Aries, and this date.
On that date, you want to talk about natural cosmic foreshadowing. On the date that Uranus moved from Pisces into Aries, granted it moved into Aries and then back into Pisces, but the day it moved into Aries to stay there for 7 years, that was the day of the earthquake that created the Fukushima tidal wave meltdown and disaster that we still don't have our minds even beginning to be wrapped around the intensity of what happened there.
Certainly didn't predict. So is there a word called post-dict? We haven't even
caught up to
that thing.
I've actually written an article on
post-dicting?
On post-dicting. Yeah. I think I have a Cancer moon.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we get hung up in predicting things, and that we would learn more by post-dicting things. And this, incidentally, is Rick Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche. Mm. It's basically when we look at history, which we have to understand that astrologers, 50 years ago, didn't have the ability to look at history.
Do we?
Why do you ask that?
Because when I do all this eclipse research as I am now, it's, assassinations, plane crashes, terrorist events. I don't see free love was born in this year.
No, point well taken there. But that's the exact same issue we were talking about when we opened with the conjunction squares and oppositions. When we look back in our lives, we see the things that stick out. We don't see the things that. I mean, that's a function of how we measure time by events. Mm. And as I'm sure we would agree on, although we've never discussed it, sometimes the most important events, maybe always the most important events, are the events that never are seen. They're metaphysical events. Mm. And this, I think, is reflected first in Western literature by Carl Jung's autobiography called Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, in which in the opening statements he goes, this is not a book about anything that's happened on the exterior of my life. This is an autobiography. But it's an autobiography of what's important, not of the things that other people might see. Mm. My paraphrase of his words, incidentally, not his words. And by the same token, I think another thing that's happened here, and this is a really important thing, we are living in a time where there has been maybe the greatest shift ever, at least in modern history, because the shift that we've seen, we go back and we see periods of time where Rome was the center of the Western world as we knew it, or London, or Washington, D.C. These are all physical, that wealth was physical. Pluto, wealth underground, real estate. Wealth was, your real estate. The estate, even the word estate has to do with things that are real. The wealthiest people in the world right now own portions of the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm. They own information nexi. Nexi, is that a word?
Sure.
Nexuses.
It is now.
Nexuses. They own the United States instead of auctioning off large tracts of land. I can't say that we have dinosaurs auctioning off large tracts of land again, but the wealth comes from auctioning off sections of the electromagnetic spectrum, which 200 years ago, 150 years ago, no one even knew existed. So what we've seen, and this is the discovery of Uranus in the late 18th century, and the subsequent outer planet connections with Uranus, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, is we've been witness to, whether we're aware of it or not, a shift from the physical to the metaphysical. Because all the planets that are infra-Saturnian are physical. They are perceivable with our senses. Bucky Fuller once commented that 99% of all modern scientific research was occurring in areas of universe that are not discernible by our senses. So that when you add the technology of Promethean, Uranian technology, all of a sudden we're looking at things that are outside of the realm of the hard Saturnian perceivable universe. And so what we don't even realize is that we have, as a species, made a shift from the dominance of the physical Saturnian universe into the dominance of a metaphysical universe. It's an interesting side note, but it's what we talk about the Uranus-Pluto trine. We're talking about a meshing of this because it's a process. It's shocking, but at the trine point, we can see the differences of the resistance of Saturn and the old and the holding on to tradition and the fear and the need for some walls. You know, if there were no cell walls, we would all be jelly. You know,
Yes.
Saturn, you know, New Agers who say, break down all the walls, that doesn't work either.
Right.
There has to be structure. But there also has to be a structure that is animated, electrified enough by Uranus that it stays alive and that it adapts to the
alive.
It's alive.
Yeah, I mean, and even in the We Are All One, which is beautiful and true, there's something about we are living in different monkey suits, and there's a reason for that, right? So where Neptune might want us all to just merge, Saturn will keep us in our individual spaces, and Uranus will remind us that we actually are both at once in a way, you know? So when I study in nature, when I study the fire signs, I study with fire.
Right.
And what I see is that Aries is the spark that gets the thing going. Leo is the
fire starter.
roaring flames, you know, that golden ball of self-love. And from there rises the smoke. And this is Sagittarius, travels far and wide, finds its own path to the heavens, and carries the spark that starts the next cycle.
And I think that's a brilliant picture. I have one that I use that's very similar, but like Aries is the fire starter. Aries is the fire. It's the bonfire where you throw everything on the fire and it's gone in an hour. It's magnificent for the heat it generates in the moment. But and I'm saying this as you know, a multi-planeted Aries, it doesn't have staying power. Leo gives it staying power.
Yeah, fixes it.
It fixes it, and so instead of being the fire that just burns and goes out, we now have the sun, which is obviously in astrology, Leo is related to our local sun, which is a star, but it's a star that is, from our point of view, it's fixed because everything in our little neighborhood goes around it. And so it becomes the center of the light. It becomes the heart center of our little beating, celestial neighborhood, if you will. But then you look at all the other suns out there, and that's Sagittarius. They still are centers of their own world, but they're far enough away that create in us a longing, a sense of wanting to travel, to get up above and beyond, our mundane life, our little neighborhood here, and to reach out further, which is a Jupiterian, Sagittarian kind of thing. Same thing you said, just in a slightly different language.
I love it, and what it brought me to is like, wow, that's crazy, because to fix this fire, Leo, so it lasts for the whole party, Leo, the conductors of that portion of the celestial symphony will be Mars and will be a total solar eclipse.
Right,
It's like
right.
wild.
But you see, Saturn is there anchoring it.
Right.
Saturn has a vital role in this whole thing.
But anchoring it in the sign of Sagittarius, and this is to me where, like, for me, if we can contemplate Sagittarius as the smoke, then it's a chimney, and the chimney, like, if it's somebody else's chimney telling you this is the only way to seek, right? You got to blast out. We need some Uranus and blow that thing up, but that doesn't mean that the chimney is unwise, because it will help the smoke rise in a very concentrated way. And so what I see with Saturn and Sagittarius, it's almost like spiritual practices or, knowledge in the way and tradition in the way of philosophy and expanding our consciousness. And so what else can you tell us about Saturn and Sag?
Grant Louis, who's one of my main men, I think his writing is like really fantastic. Grant Louis said that Saturn in Sagittarius, someone who's born with Saturn in Sagittarius, it's like they would rather have an idealistic and right goal in life and not reach it than reach the wrong goal. It's that distant. It's the destination that we're going toward, and it's the proverbial, the journey is more important than the destination.
Yeah.
And Saturn in Sagittarius encourages us to think about a destination, whether or not we're going to reach it, and to make a plan to reach it, whether or not we're going to reach it, because it's not about reaching the destination, it's about having a life that's mapping toward the right direction. And so that to me, that Saturn in Sagittarius basically takes the fire of the Aries Uranus. Everything is new. I have an iPad and a cell phone, and I have latest computer software, and I know how to dial Uber, and I can do Facebook Live, and all of this stuff is Uranus and Aries, as is many other things.
Yeah.
But in a way, if I'm not heading in the right direction, who the fuck cares? It's all for a waste.
Yeah, and that's so important, because at this time, so Uranus and Aries, occupy yourself. Like, we actually have had this awakening about the 1%. It's not new. It's just that now people are really tuned into it, but also that ability to reflect on the without is the within, and see these as reflections of our own inner structures and releasing that. That's what I mean by occupy yourself, right? But this great fiery awakening of Uranus and Aries, it's very significant. I mean, Fukushima, and that's also, in my world, that's a reflection of me. What is that? How is my power being misused, etc.? Okay, so we have this eclipse, Mars, like Leo, just party happening. It's going to be wild, and there are many wild parties that are going to be happening to celebrate it. But this transformation and this change and coming into that in a bright, fiery way is so beautiful. But have the vision. Right, like no true revolution will come through without first receiving revelation, and this is what I'm hearing in your words. The Great Awakening, but also have a plan, have a goal.
That's the Saturn
So I
side.
hear so much of just impeach and get it out of there. It's like, okay, great, then what? I don't know, just get it done. Like, I was like, wait, then what? Yeah. Because for me, the greatest Buckminster Fuller quote, and you might, you'll paraphrase it better than I can if you don't have it memorized, since you've been such a disciple book for a long time. But what's the quote about have the vision of the greater thing and do it from the inside? Do you know what I'm trying to get through?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that was his whole. That was his whole.
I'm gonna look it up. Talk to us, Rick.
Talk to us. The pressure is on. Well, these are interesting times, aren't they? They are times when we don't realize how big a time this is. And when I say this, I'm not only talking about the Uranus-Neptune trine, because although people who have listened to me before know that this is part of my, I say this every chance I get, and I have a chance, so I'm saying it now, and that is that the Uranus-Pluto square, which was technically from 2012 to 2015, ain't over. Just like the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which was 65-66, was still building in intensity in 67, 68, 69, even 70. It wasn't until 72 that the issues of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction began to fade.
Right. And
it's the same thing as the lag of seasons. The day of greatest light isn't the hottest day in the year.
Right.
And so what's happening now, what we're experiencing now in late June, July, August of 2017 is we're experiencing Jupiter, a slow-moving heavyweight planet, reactivating the Uranus-Pluto, though now waning or separating Uranus-Pluto square, because every time faster-moving planets, and the planets moving through Cancer just recently, and the lunation hitting the opposition to Pluto,
right.
What happens is that the Uranus-Pluto square is not over. And
Yes.
so we're getting the blessing of the Saturn part coming in and giving us some ability to work with this, not in total chaos. And yet at the same time, we're still experiencing the total chaos of the dynamic square between the shock, awe, and surprise and awakening of Uranus and the gradual evolutionary transformational process of Pluto.
Yeah.
The quote.
But a quick moment for advertisement. So if you are enjoying this, and I say this because I just recorded a long go live here at the CIA page about this lunation cycle and about how the conjunction was kind of Mars and the square was with Jupiter and the opposition, the closest Pluto Capricorn full moon of our lifetimes, and the third quarter will be right with Uranus, and it's kind of tying these players in who were of the Grand Cross of 2014, though Mars and Jupiter have switched signs. But also just to say that the Uranus-Pluto square isn't over, because we're just in the beginning stages of this cycle that started in the 60s anyway.
Yeah.
But if you want to, catch these go lives, we're going to be doing more of them and more of these cosmic conversations with agents like Merlin here. Sign up for CIA. And there's a thing you can click to make sure you get notified when we go live, and maybe we'll say a few things at the end as well. But back to this, and let's get back to Bucky. It's always a beautiful resource for our expansion.
Before you tell us the quote, I just want to say that history will look back at the 20th century, if we have a history, if we figure this thing out. History will look back at the 20th century, and the most outstanding scientist of the time will not be Niels Bohr, the guy who figured out quantum physics, will not be Albert Einstein, but will be Bucky Fuller. That's my prediction.
I love hearing that, because if more people come to Bucky, more people will come to their senses. And so this is the quote I was reaching for. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
And actually, I think that concept was a Platonic concept.
Like the Platonic schools, like Plato.
Yeah. Plato, that stuff you know.
That's what Plato was to me. I ate him. Right, so this is a really important thing. It's a time for vision agents to really come alive. But let's sit and come actually together in community, in fellowship, and really contemplate what is this new way. This is what great leaders like Buckminster Fuller were encouraging and demonstrating. And there's a lot of fire. There's a lot of creative force building up. It's not going away anytime soon. And we have some stability here to bring ourselves to revolutionary thought and new spiritual thought, I would say, too. And if we do this playfully, right, dramatically even, with this Leo eclipse, and anchor it in there, but in a stable way that it just doesn't, Burning Man.
My friend Caroline Casey says, if you're not having fun, you're not being serious enough.
That's a great quote, and the right person to say it.
By the way, the Bucky Fuller quote you just pulled was, and I know that you're aware of this, I just want to come back and make the point of how Saturnian that was to Uranus, because the Uranus part is the change. But the Saturn part says you don't make change by changing things. You make change by creating Saturn that's different than the current Saturn. So it's like taking a step. You have another place to stand when you take that next step.
Yeah, and I think, in invoking the play as well, Masaru Emoto showed us in the Hidden Messages of Water, that prayer to water, it's not like, oh, this is so terrible, we're polluting you and people are dying of thirst, and that will just take that water crystal and distort it the same way as blasting it with some Metallica. You get that beautiful Bach or John Lennon Imagine crystal, I love you so much, you are, you feed my soul, you are life, right? And so there's a lot
but
of...
I love my Metallica.
Well, right, so rock some Metallica, but keep your prayers clean, I don't know. But, so what is it now when we're all going to die and we're destroying the earth? And I mean, I'm not saying we're not meant to awaken and change, right? But there's something also about getting outside, walking in the forest, because we can now, enjoying the songs of the birds, being with your tribe, connecting in community, making true change, but also having a good time when you do it and celebrating this gift of life.
I'm sure that you're aware of, and probably many of our watchers, what do you call them? Voyeurs, observers, participants. Who the hell are you out there? Viewers. That's it. Viewers.
They're watching
many of our viewers know this, and when I'm gonna paraphrase here something that's been called the latest of the Hopi prophecies. And the Hopi are one of the Southwest tribes of indigenous American peoples, and they've been focusing on prophecies for many years. And their council met recently, a few years ago, and basically what they issued a statement, and the statement basically said, we've been talking for a long time about the great change. It's here, now. And it goes something like this. The waters of the rivers are moving fast. He who holds on to the shore in fear will be torn asunder. Push away from the shore and out into the middle of this swiftly moving water. Keep your head above water. Look around and see who's there. This is your new family. Be joyous.
And we are the ones we've been waiting for, and the time is now. I just searched for the Book of the Hopi because a lot of the prophecies were kind of transmitted by Frank Waters, and then I thought it was more recent, this, but 1963. But that is the Triceros, the last time this same eclipse family coming our way in August last visited these longitudes.
It's also the application of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction.
And so wheels within wheels, and we could do this forever. And
we are, but not on Facebook Live.
That's true. There was an unpredictable goallessness was our goal today, and I think we've reached it, Rick.
Can we go home now?
I think we can, or at least to dinner.
I'm home.
All right. Do you want to announce any of your things that you're doing? You have a million of them always.
No, I'm doing a weekend workshop at Brighton, or actually a 4-day workshop at Brighton Bush the end of the month, but it's sold out full. I think that for those of you who don't know my work and want to stay in touch with it, best thing to do is find me on Facebook or StarIQ, STARIQ.com. I have been crazy busy, but I'll be doing another workshop next summer at Brighton Bush. I'll be doing an extended 10-day workshop next fall 2018 in Bali. Again, it'll be my 6th workshop retreat in Bali. Just pay attention to my monthlies. YouTube, you can search on YouTube for Rick Levine Astrologer. That'll find me, and let's meet again.
Cool. Well, I will throw some things out. I'm Gemini Brett, Agent 1123, Cosmic Intelligence Agency. You can find me at morethan.astrology.com. And one of the things that you'll find right on the homepage right now is an Eclipse Within Idaho event. 4 days.
That looks like fun. I read about it.
Camping.
It looks like a lot of
music,
fun. At Trinity Hot Springs?
Trinity Hot Springs. Rumored to be the deepest source hot springs on Earth. We're going to have a very intentional and sober, if that's not your thing, this isn't for you, but like sober, because the eclipse itself is like a gallon of jungle sauce, you know what I mean? We're moving into real stuff. So we're going to very intentionally work through yoga practices and a depth psychologist and sweat lodge and a lot of storytelling with live music. We're going to have a lot of fun in the hot springs and go see this eclipse and see the diamond ring in the sky. So you can find that at the homepage of morethan.astrology.com. I didn't put it in the events section because it's too important. After that, I'll be speaking at the OPA retreat in Zion National Park in October, and then heading out to Melbourne, back to Australia with me for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency's retreat celebrating Jupiter's ingress Scorpio and the Jupiter Cazimi. We're going to do some serious magic. I know a lot of you are in Australia listening, so I sure hope you make it. And I know a lot of you are not in Australia, and I sure hope you make it. We're going to have a lot of fun, and I'm excited to work with stars that I don't really know yet.
It's so weird. First time I was in Australia looking up, it's like everything's wrong. It's
yeah.
Like, wait a minute. Okay. The moon's upside down, but that I can handle. But what's that? Oh, that looks like Orion upside down. Oh, that's not Orion. That's the teapot.
Mm-hmm.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Well, I first received astrology.
The Crosby, Stills and Nash song. The first time I saw the Southern Cross was like that, powerful.
Yeah, And so the first time I really received astrology in 2012 from the jungles of Peru, and I was the whole trip was Jupiter was in the horns of the bull, and they were upside down. I was tripping about it, and I asked him about it, and he spoke to me in English, and I've been weirder ever since. Day by day.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
welcome home.
Thank you. So there's one thing, just to add that bit. Not only is this a grand fire trine, but it's really in kite to Jupiter and Libra too.
Yeah.
And maybe we can just invoke the greater goodness of that opportunity of the gas giant guru moving through the sign that has long been associated with justice. And
indigestion.
And peace. And indigestion. So we better go before we all get sick. Thank you very much for tuning in, folks. For Agent Merlin, Rick Levine, this is Gemini Brett signing off. We will see you in space.
End time.